Hey everyone, I hope that you're doing well. My name's Jeremy, and if you're clicking on this video, you're interested in listening to me walk through my dissertation defense talk track. This is my third recording in an attempt to build up my confidence for my dissertation defense tomorrow. I have created other videos of me walking through how I prepared for my dissertation defense, and I simply am uploading practice runs so I can go back, listen to it, and make adjustments to my talk track. Eventually, I'd like to get to the point where I don't need my talk track as much because I want it to come across as conversational and not me reading from a script. So with that being said, I will get started. So I see 4:05 on the clock. Good afternoon. I'm glad to have made it to this point of defending my dissertation. My name is Jeremy Wright, and I'm elated to share my research with you. First, I have to give a major thank you to Dr. Riley and Dr. Cronin Gilmore. You know very well the ups and downs that I've had throughout this program, from significant job changes to topic changes to death and more. The grace that you've extended to me and the feedback that you provided as a part of this process has made me a better researcher and a better human being. Thank you. The topics listed on this outline will be the topics for which we'll cover today. My personal interest and problem statement to understand and frame my choice in research, the literature review to discuss the bodies of knowledge relevant to my topics, research design to talk about how I went about conducting my research, quantitative results to discuss the statistical analysis, summary of key findings to discuss the points that are critically important to our conversation today, implication and limitations to discuss impacts of my research and how it would be improved, future research and next steps to discuss adjustments to replicating this work, and my personal and professional plans. To help you understand my choice in research, for the past 17 years, I've worked in three Fortune 500 companies, starting in customer facing roles where I was exposed to constant people interactions. It got to the point to where I experienced chronic high stress, and eventually got to the point where I was burnout. And experiencing burnout was a catalyst to me finding new ways of living. And earlier into my career with my current employer, I knew I wanted to contribute more, but I didn't have the experience or exposure to know what's possible. So through using the tools and resources that HR provides, I identified that human resources was the right fit for me. It was the opportunity for me to help companies unlock people potential, to improve their quality of life. And I wanted to share what I experienced with others to make myself more competitive to get into HR. I enrolled in undergraduate and graduate programs, specifically Bellevue University's IO Psychology graduate program, which exposed me to emotional intelligence. Eventually, I made my way into human resources, finding a sense of fulfillment, yet I still experienced chronic high stress. My problem statement frames stress as a common experience amongst those who do people work. I specifically wanted to understand that experience from the lens of an HR professional. So let's break down my problem statement, the research question, and theoretical framework a little bit more. Helping professionals. Helping professionals have an outward focus by helping people and have constant people interactions. HR professionals could be categorized as helping professionals similar to those who work in healthcare, priests, and education. HR has evolved significantly from administrative processes to wearing multiple hats, while helping executive leaders make really strategic level decisions with broad implications. We could look at HR's work on two different axes. One axis would be the present versus future focus, and then a people or process focus on the other. This leads to dynamic foci competing priorities and balancing the role of the HR professional while trying to help the business get what they need done without many negative implications. An example of that could be seen if you review the 10K form of for-profit companies, for example, Verizon, Amazon, and Walmart. In the risk section, they identify talent as something that could prevent them from being successful if not cared for. The nature of HR's role exposes HR professionals to constant stress. 83% of the U.S. workforce has experienced some type of workplace stress. And in 2019, that accounted for about $300 billion in general costs to the U.S. Although stress has no universal definition, it is widely researched and heavily focuses on helping professionals. When we are exposed to high stress chronically, we develop a sense of burnout, which manifests physically, mentally, and emotionally. Burnout has the potential to have negative life-altering impacts, such as insomnia or even major accidents. When evaluating research on stress and burnout, there's a lack of understanding on how HR professionals are prepared for and or deal with stress and equally, if not important, burnout. This is why I had to search for an answer to the how. Which is why emotional intelligence is a part of this research. Emotional intelligence is also a heavily researched topic as well. To address this gap, my dissertation uses the conservation of resources theory to explain the relationship between stress and burnout, controlling for the effects of emotional intelligence. I'll now walk you through my literature review to discuss the bodies of knowledge relevant to my topic. First, we'll focus on the conservation of resources theory. My research draws upon this theory, which helps me frame my research to understand the actions that people take in certain circumstances. The conservation of resources theory suggests people take action by retaining, protecting, or building for resources they deem valuable. What individuals deem as valuable is really up to them. It could be materialistic or not. It could be characteristics, or it could be conditions. When we think of the conservation of resources theory, there are really three pillars. The threat of net loss, the actual net loss of resources, and the lack of resource gain following the investment of resources. What's interesting about the conservation of resource theory is that stress is the trigger for action. The conservation of resource theory is researched with variables that we see in this study as well as others, for example, organizational citizenship behavior and job performance. When we look at occupational stress, we experience stress when what's required of us is taxing or more than our capacity permits. Simply put, what's being asked of us is more than the capacity to give. Originally, stress was focused on as a physiological process, and eventually, thanks to psychologists, was viewed as a psychological process. And we can look at major points in history, for example, World War I and World War II, that act as catalyst for that change. People were coming back from war and their physical symptoms were being analyzed, but not their psychological symptoms, which is how emotions were connected to the physical symptoms being observed. Stress in the workplace or occupational stress is heavily researched and correlated with many things. For example, job satisfaction, sales performance, employee turnover, and organizational performance. The types of participants used in research on work stress are healthcare workers, hospitality and service workers, educators, IT professionals, and marketing professionals, those who do outward-facing work. When looking at stress on the individuals, it can show up in sickness, absences, work-related injuries, and turnover, mental and physical well-being, and aggressive communication or bullying. Essentially, people become less effective at their work. When stress in the workplace, when looking at stress in the workplace, stress can happen as a result of poor communication, insufficient resources, resources being taken away, or even conflicts. These root causes alone or even together, individuals will eventually experience stress. Unfavorable outcomes in the workplace can be seen as inefficiencies, increased turnover, increased healthcare costs and accidents, even low motivations. When looking at interventions, they're critical to stress mitigation, and can be seen at three different levels. One, identifying causes and reducing employee exposure to them. Two, enabling individuals to deal with stress, which can be psychological or educational in nature. For example, relaxation rooms or trainings. And then finally, post stress interventions. When looking at burnout, we experience this as a result of chronic exposure to stress. When we look at the history of burnout, it was catalyzed from the response to poverty issues in the 1960s, where people had a lot of optimism to address these issues, but were met with bureaucracy. This led to research with human services in the 1970s. And as we can see, stress is still an ongoing phenomenon today. When looking at burnout for the individual, there are really three dimensions that burnout rests on: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and a reduced sense of accomplishment, which are linked to one another and also have a compounding effect. The types of participants used in research on burnout are those professions who deal with life and death. For example, healthcare professionals. Costs can be personal, social, or even economic. Burnout can show up as personal distress, physical exhaustion, insomnia, increased use of alcohol and drugs, marital and family problems. Essentially, individuals cannot sustain their contributions. When looking at workplace burnout in the workplace, interactions can be influenced by it. More pleasant interactions mean less likelihood of burnout, and that's also contingent upon managerial support. The areas of work-life model is an example of how burnout can be reduced in the workplace. It offers 6 positive fits to help with workplace engagement and well-being. It creates an environment where people take action to prevent burnout from happening. When we look at burnout interventions, they're usually focused on the individual or they're focused on the job. Research suggests that they should be strategic in nature, or strategic or organizational level. Personal level is yoga or team building or mindfulness. Yet strategic level addresses root causes and informs culture and workplace environment and policies. It needs to be proactive in addressing the job. When looking at emotional intelligence broadly, it's people's ability to discern changes in emotion to make better decisions. Research on emotional intelligence is divided into two bodies: ability emotional intelligence and trait emotional intelligence. Early on, Mayer and Salvi aligned with emotional intelligence being a mental ability, and others aligned with emotional intelligence being a combination of traits, competencies, and skills. Research suggests that emotional intelligence is linked to favorable outcomes such as employees, leaders, and businesses, job satisfaction, burnout, and occupational stress. The types of participants used in research on emotional intelligence are occupation or organizational leaders, product or customer facing employees, or healthcare providers. There are 4 dimensions to emotional intelligence, which are categorized as self, emotional appraisal, others, emotional appraisal, regulation of emotion, and use of emotion. When looking at emotional intelligence in the workplace, it's negatively associated with stress and turnover, positively associated with job satisfaction, negotiation outcomes, and team performance. And it's important that we have emotional intelligence in the workplace based on the number of social interactions we have. It helps people to really know how to interact with one another based on established culture. When looking at emotional intelligence and research, emotional intelligence in HR, the research focuses on HR as the assessor or leveraging the emotional intelligence their emotional intelligence to the organization's benefit. It doesn't focus on the professional, the HR professional themselves. High performance HR activities informed by emotional intelligence of the HR professional can positively influence outcomes. And then research also suggests that emotional intelligence can be developed and is constantly linked to competitive advantage. It would be a huge benefit for companies to invest in HR, specifically their emotional intelligence. The world is constantly changing and being more data driven. Research has linked emotional intelligence or HR to shape information behaviors. The demands of HR is constantly changing, and some of the work that is being done, for example, using data and evaluating job descriptions. Improvement in quality of life could be an outcome for HR professionals if they are the target audience for research on emotional intelligence development. My dissertation builds upon what we've discussed by examining stress, burnout, and emotional intelligence by focusing on the HR professional. This non-experimental quantitative study aimed to answer my research question: does the conservation of resources theory explain the relationship between stress and burnout, controlling for the effects of emotional intelligence? My sample consisted of over 200 HR professionals based in the United States, recruited through the prolific platform via convenient sampling. Data was collected in Qualtrics, and I used three instruments that were cited in research and tested in SPSS for validity and reliability: the Wong Law Emotional Intelligence Scale, the Perceived Occupational Stress Scale, and the Maslow Burnout Inventory. Data was analyzed via regression analysis, which allows for statistical variation to be identified between the independent and dependent variable. Specifically, moderation regression analysis was used to evaluate emotional intelligence as a moderator variable, stress as the independent variable, and burnout as the dependent variable. Multiple regression analysis was used to evaluate the three dimensions of burnout: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced sense of accomplishment as the dependent variables, and occupational stress and emotional intelligence as the independent variables, which you can see reflected in the hypotheses. Key findings from our research starts with descriptive statistics. If we look in the top left corner, we see age, HR experience, firm tenure, firm size are highlighted. Interesting call outs were the average age was 38.38. Minimum and maximum age was 19 and 17, or 77, excuse me. The mode for HR experience and firm tenure were 2. And the maximum size for a firm size was 65,000. If we look in the bottom left corner, we see that majority of participants were female, and the age group of 26 to 35 had a third of participants. To the right, we can see that almost 50% of participants had 0 to 5 years experience. The same with years of tenure, 0 to 5, although it was more than 50%. 50% of participants stated that they were in the human resources function HR organizational structure, which meant that everybody had a specialty. SPSS was used to ensure assumptions for moderation analysis were met, and as a result, found the interaction effect of stress and emotional intelligence were not significant predictors of burnout, although separately, emotional intelligence reflected a negative statistically significant effect on burnout, and stress reflected a positive statistically significant effect on burnout. When looking at the interaction effect, the p-value shows greater than 5, and the confidence interval included 0. Therefore, emotional intelligence is not a significant moderator of the relationship between stress and burnout. SPSS was used to ensure assumptions for multiple regression analysis were met, and as a result found emotional intelligence and stress were significant predictors of each dimension of burnout. The most noticeable prediction was emotional intelligence and stress accounting for 65% change in emotional exhaustion. For every unit increase of emotional intelligence by one standard deviation, emotional exhaustion decreased by 0.143. Additionally, for every unit increase of stress by one standard deviation, emotional exhaustion increased by 0.757. In summary, my findings suggest a statistically significant relationship between stress and burnout. This was an expected result based on research. For every unit increase in stress, burnout was negatively influenced by 0.47. The more stressed someone is, the more likely they are to experience burnout. A statistically significant relationship between emotional intelligence and burnout was found. This was an expected result based on research. For every unit increase in emotional intelligence, burnout was positively influenced by 0.39. The higher someone's emotional intelligence, the less likely they are to experience burnout. When evaluating the outlined hypotheses, we fail to reject the null hypotheses, as emotional intelligence had no statistically significant effect on the stress and burnout relationship. This was an unexpected result based on research. Awareness of stress does not equate to action to mitigate burnout. HR outputs are critically important to the business, and I think that offers context for why HR professionals may push through their stress to get work done. Workplace tasks for HR professionals are deemed a more valuable resource than their risk of burnout. And that's in context of the conservation of resources theoretical framework. When we look at the remaining hypotheses, we reject the remaining three, as emotional intelligence had a statistically significant effect on each of the three dimensions of burnout. This was an expected result based on research. This contrasts failing to reject the null hypotheses, but could be understood as one's awareness of stress while being able to acknowledge aspects of burnout, yet not taking steps to avoid it. The workplace and expectations of HR may limit the HR professional's ability to take action to mitigate burnout. These findings have implications, one for which I'll highlight. If organizations want HR professionals to prioritize tasks over their well-being, they should change nothing as work is getting done. If this is not the case, organizations should create a culture that promotes well-being and reinforces policies that support this. So as people make decisions, they take action to prioritize their well-being over task. The HR professionals should feel comfortable taking action to protect what they deem valuable, which would be their state of non-stress or good well-being. I'll highlight one methodical and researcher-based limitation. When looking at the methodical limitation at the time of administering the survey, there are certain HR activities such as performance reviews or compensation planning or even major organizational changes, which could skew results, given those are critically important and will probably be prioritized by HR professionals. So taking surveys at certain times of the year will almost yield the same results if these critical HR activities are happening. I am an HR professional. Day by day. And in my own personal experience with chronic exposure to high stress in various roles, this could lead me to develop blind spots in interpreting results. When thinking about future research, there are a few things that we could focus on. For example, evaluating trait emotional intelligence compared to ability emotional intelligence. We could use other instruments or scales for variables in this study. We could even focus on specific industries or specific tenure range of HR professionals. When thinking about next steps, this research process has been a continuous workout and investment of a lot of resources. So my goal would be to seek support from the university in publishing my work, as this could propel my career forward and be a good reflection on the university. Also, I'm happy to report that I started a new role in selection and assessment, being promoted from a consultant to senior manager, and was given kudos for my ability to articulate how I approach certain things within the workplace, which I credit this program and research experience. My end goal in corporate America is to become an HR executive, to shape culture that focuses on well being and unlocking people's potential, as was done for me. In conclusion, this dissertation contributes to the understanding of emotional intelligence and its effect on the stress and burnout relationship amongst HR professionals. The findings highlight the possibility of HR professionals being aware of their stress, yet prioritizing critical HR activities that are inputs into the business over their personal well being. With that, thank you so much for your time, and I am prepared to answer questions. All right, so if I shave off the 405, that puts me at about 24 and some change. So this is my third attempt, and I feel good about talking through my dissertation defense, and I think it's important for me to continue practicing and going back to listen to myself, so that way I can see where I kind of stumble, or maybe something didn't sound right, and I can improve it, so that way tomorrow when I'm in front of the committee, I can do a really, really good job. So with that, I appreciate you being a part of this journey, and I hope that this helps you in your decision making about pursuing doctoral studies. And I also hope that this helps you in your preparation for defending your dissertation. Have a great day.